everybody. Welcome to our Wednesday, June 15th. Sorry, I couldn't see the date. June 15th baseline show. We have an open office hours today with our baseline community, and we are going to discuss how Consensus 2022 by CoinDesk was. That just happened in Austin this past weekend, as well as all other things baseline or baseline adjacent. So I will first start by just seeing here if anybody else here was at Consensus 2022 that I'm not aware of. Okay.
Yeah, I was there.
Yes, Keith, Mark, and I were there. So I think
you guys were there too?
Yeah. Yep. And let's start then by maybe covering some of the speakers and talks that we saw. Keith, if you want to kick us off.
Oh, sure, I guess. Which talk would you like to talk about first? I think what was the first one we saw? What was the first one we went
The
to?
merge.
Oh, the merge. Yeah. I don't was that who were the speakers all there? Was that the one with Joe?
Yes,
Yeah,
that
that
was the
Joe.
panel about the ETH 2.0 merge, and they were talking about if it's going to happen as planned, some of the ramifications, who benefits from it. It was a little heated. It was very interesting though.
Yeah, I think a lot of the questions, well, I don't know, there was whoever was hosting was not like the original plan host. Was that right?
Yes, the original host was supposed to be the author of The Infinite Machine, which is Camila Russo. So she has a really extensive history in Ethereum and has done some research, but she was unable to make it. So they had a reporter or other person from CoinDesk managing it.
Yeah, there was a CoinDesk. I forget her name, but I think a lot of the feedback we got was that, like from other people that listened, that a lot of the questions, I don't know, they were like more negatively charged, like from the panel people than they thought they were going to be. A lot of them were like, just pushing for like, hey, what could go wrong? What's all the bad things that could possibly happen? But I think most of them steered pretty clear away from that immediately. And then there was a lot of arguing about like, well, who's holding on to, they kept like questioning Joe, how much ETH, percent of the ETH do you have out there? And then he threw it back at CoinDesk. And so there was a lot that wasn't exactly like talked about regarding just the merge, but maybe the things like adjacent to it.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention that. I was just on the project governance board call for Baseline or for the EA community projects, and we resolved to. There's a really good member. I don't want to out them right now, but there's a really good member, not myself, who from a really big company, very good listener, who is going to take up the action of working on better governance rules for all of the EA community projects, and actually for Oasis. And I think it might be a landmark piece of work for standards bodies in general in the age of tokens, right? For example, as a co-chair, should I have to disclose my token holdings if I have any? Should I not have any? Should I not have any, at least in anything that is contending inside the project? But other things like how do you is shilling allowed in or shilling, not destructive shilling, that is saying, hey, my thing is better than your thing, or you shouldn't do your thing because I've done my thing, that sort of thing. Standards bodies for time immemorial have been populated by companies that want to associate their name with the standard. That's not a problem, but how you conduct yourself in that manner. So we see this in the token space all over, and certainly in a conference like Coinbase. I mean, this is nothing new. I mean, 2015, those kinds of conversations were happening, and a lot of contentiousness. Oh, you're just you're holding this, and that's why you're saying that. And nobody could tell who really believed what they were saying and who was just holding tokens. It's a problem.
Just do what you do in a permissionless system. Assume 100% adversarial environment. that's the only way to go. Otherwise, you're building layers and layers of governance processes that are trying to keep out things. Where if you just assume everybody's holding, everybody is shilling, and it's an incumbent on every participant to decide for themselves is what they hear is to be trusted or
Is,
or
isn't
not.
that the sad irony of this idealism that we have around trying to create this trustless, permissionless system, is that we're trying to build a world where we don't have to trust each other. And in order to make it work, apparently, according to that thesis, Andreas, and I wouldn't disagree with you, you have to not trust each other. So
I mean,
that sounds like a fun world to live in.
No, that's a basic premise of a permissionless blockchain. It's like it's
How I
100.
live
You
my life.
must assume it's 100% adversarial, and that's why you have that's why you have economic security guarantees, because everybody is trying to optimize their utility function. If you have something at stake at all times, or you put something in that you're bound to lose if you behave badly, then everything works.
blockchain, trust no one.
So, I mean,
That's
and
true.
actually, I'm reminded on the Sage quote from Adam Smith, where it said, "It's not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest." So we either want to make it better or we want to
Correct.
not hurt people.
Well, we can get into Nash equilibria from here, right? I mean, it's not about self-interest; it's about enlightened self-interest, and it's about establishing an equilibrium. I think that'd be the more, and that may be the way through intellectually on this conversation. Andreas, wouldn't you agree that it isn't, trust no one? It is trust everyone to work in their interest, and then try to find an equilibrium between those things.
Well, and equilibrium is a natural force. I mean, it eventually finds it eventually. Homeostasis in biology, that sort of stuff. We need to find that steady state.
I'd like to find it with less bloodshed, but yeah.
That is true. It's like so the key thing is that, so if I'm going there, the equilibrium is exactly right. It's called, actually it has a name. It's called the Nash equilibrium.
Mhm.
The problem is that you need to be able to have established rules, and if players have no way to find a strategy to win, then they will either abandon the game or they will try to change the rules in their favor. If they abandon the game, that's fine. If they try to change the rules unilaterally because they think they have the power to do so, that's when to John's point, that's when you get bloodshed.
And that might be, I'll encourage the person doing the work on this to watch this tape. I think, or this the session. I think that's maybe foundational to the idea of rule setting in a standards body that is dealing with tokens is exactly that. That if one of the no-nos is trying to change the rules unilaterally, like having too much power in the repo to merge, right? And like being able to have just your cohort of token holders decide on a merge change because there's three you have three maintainers, and that those three maintainers all happen to be your guys.
Anyway, back to consensus, and you said there was a lot of kind of some tension in the air as far as the merge.
Yeah, there is a
Well,
little bit of tension.
Do you think it's impatience? It's like, come on, we really need this happening, or you have some of us remember Casper, the project Casper from 3 years ago, where that was the original, merge to proof of stake, and that really didn't, operate as planned.
That's still in there.
Beacon Chain uses Casper FFG, so that works really well and has been proven out to work really well in production. The big thing is is taking out is modularizing the client, right? Basically, what you have in the Ethereum client are two things that not necessarily have anything to do with one another, or really three things. Number one is your mempool of the transaction. Number two is your state execution engine. And number three is your consensus engine. So what the merge does, it rips out the consensus engine entirely and replaces, which is proof of work, and replaces that with a consensus module that is running on a different client. So you have an execution client and you have a consensus client. The execution client dumps the results to the consensus client, and the consensus client tries to get consensus on that sucker. Right? And
Okay.
well, yes, yeah, it tries, exactly, because almost all public blockchains are probabilistic chains, which means you have multiple chains going on at the same time, competing to be the longest chain. And that's what's called eventual consistency. You don't have strong consistency, aka immediate finality, that you have with the classic consensus algorithms. You have eventual consistency, which actually has a significant advantage. Namely, if the longest chain gets attacked, you can always switch over to another chain and go on. If you have strong consistency, that's not possible. You're screwed, basically.
Andreas, could you give us a quick primer on the difference? There's a subtle difference between that and, say, what the Avalanche protocol proposes, right? Gunseer was on the Zero Knowledge podcast a few weeks ago, and he was talking about how, even our probabilistic system with Ethereum, for example, is still trying to get to absolute, a statement of absolute consistency, whereas Avalanche, I think, if I understand it correctly, is kind of okay with limiting to zero for forever, right? So they don't have the forking problem, but they kind of take advantage of infinite forking or something, right? Like you tell 5 friends and they tell 5 friends, and you wind up getting consistency very quickly or something.
Yes, you're getting local consistency, and then you're that's why it's called Avalanche, right? So you're starting. It's like you have different cells of consistency, and they compete with one another. And the one that gets to the quorum fastest is the winner. So who can convince enough of their friends to agree on what they're saying, and if you have a sufficient number of them from your group, from the overall group, from all the groups, then you won, right? So it's a race. So you have the basically it just says that whoever wins, and that's the end of the story, right? That's the basic. Not going to go into any subtleties, but that's a basic assumption. Again, there are as everybody knows, there are no absolutes, there are only trade-offs, right? So it's like, again, if your group is, if your absolute state gets stuck, right, or is compromised, the entire chain is compromised, right? Until you can split off, reform, blah blah. So that can take time, right? Versus if you have a probabilistic chain, you can very quickly come to a consensus which fork to use, and say that other stuff is the Chinese takeover or the US takeover fork, and forget about that. And that's the power of eventual consistency versus strong or quasi strong consistency trade-offs, right? It's what what is appropriate to your use case, what you're going to use it for, right? It's like you will probably not use a Gatling gun to go duck hunting.
Well, you are in America.
Yes.
That is true. I take that back. But let's say there's a significant minority that does that, given the fact that Gatling guns are not really carry on. So, but anyway.
I just had 4 installed on the roof of my house last week.
Yeah, I know that we know that. Yeah, but that's basically it's like pick your algorithm, pick your chain based on what you need it for and what your trust assumptions are.
So to bring this back around to consensus, the topic of consensus 2022.
Right. So
what do you think about the
pennies in a
merge
bunch?
from that?
So everybody gets their panties in a bunch. It's primarily making sure that that's an old British saying. I apologize if I'm offending anyone, but
they would say knickers. They would say knickers.
They would say knickers. Yeah, variants. Because there's obviously there's a risk that if this falls over, it will be, it's like Ethereum is going to go, sideways, or that's the fear. And there's a lot of money tied into that, going sideways. So, or if it goes sideways, so everybody is nervous. My answer to that is it's like nothing has gone wrong yet, from rollout to anything. It's like deliberateness has proven out to be right, and I'm pretty sure that they will go in August or September, and then it's going to be good. It's not going to improve scaling or anything like that.
But isn't
right?
that kind of what we need? Is scaling?
That's exactly what we need.
That's what's going to come. That's what's going to come with sharding, which is going to happen next year. So the scale, what is scaling? You have scaling. If you want to do a Web3 game, built on Optimism or Arbitrum or any of the other optimistic rollup that have high throughput.
Yeah, because I want to spend 2 weeks getting my stuff out of there. Yeah, that's.
Well, but
especially in times like this, right? I mean, people are a lot less inclined to bridge when they're not sure, when they may need to get it all out. They may want to liquidate.
So the point, I hear you, John. The point is, that's why I'm saying, if you're playing Web3 games, right, you're not concerned about opportunity cost of your liquidity, right? If you're concerned about that, then use ZK rollups, right, for the stuff, because you have immediate data availability, so you can exit right away. You don't have to wait. So it's like, again, coming back to what I said before, choose your solution based on your use case. Don't do Web3 games on ZK rollups. There's no need for that. It's like, use optimistic rollups. It's like, you build your assets on there, you trade them, it's all good. They're not worth hundreds of thousands or even thousands of dollars. And if they are, it's like
I'm just going to build my Web3 game on Mongo and cloud, and then call it Web3. Sonal, did you guys at Consensus, did you run across any sessions on ZK and security?
Yeah. So one of the major ones that had zero knowledge in the title that we attended, just to try and get as much zero knowledge exposure as we could there, the title itself sounded exactly like Baseline. It sounded like they're explaining Baseline, but it was called How Zero Knowledge Proofs Change the Narrative Around Privacy and Bridge the Gap Between Blockchain and Enterprise. It was not Baseline, unfortunately, but it wasn't actually even super related to zero knowledge in the way that we're focusing on it in our research and development. But it was done by the co-founder of Horizon. And Keith, I'll let you actually cover what it was around.
Are you always passing it straight to me?
Yeah.
Like, here's a huge topic, Keith, go. What makes you, I'm going to throw it back to you. What makes you feel that it was like Baseline? Like, what?
No, it was, I was just hoping, like, we were going to get there and Mark Haddle would be on the stage pitching Baseline, but just the title itself sounded very relevant to what we work around.
Maybe,
Hey.
except, Baseline is better and far more unique and so on and so forth. Okay, go ahead. Sorry,
Well,
Mike.
and far more composable than just a zero knowledge standalone.
I mean, Horizon is pretty cool. I think it's especially for me because every time I'm going up to the booth, I went up to the Horizon booth. I'm asking them like, what does this do for me as a developer? What's the connection? And it, it offers all these kind of in-class tools for developers like myself. So you can build out, custom private public blockchains. They offer basically all these tools to build out these chains, with some kind of ZKP-esque factor to them and whatnot. I wasn't able to like dive into the tools yet on their site, but that's the thing I want to do in the next week. But I don't know, they're just trying to, and a lot of the same ways that we try to lower that barrier of entry into, baseline protocol ideas and whatnot. They're doing the same with ZKPs and, enabling developer communities. At least that's the part that I know about. There may be other stuff that other people got, but I'm always just like, what does it mean for me as a developer?
I think one of the bigger things that Horizon talked about too was layer zeros and layer ones and using ZKPs to allow interoperability between different chains, and how they are bridging it between enterprises was allowing, my chain over here in my enterprise to communicate with another one, fence some of the private data on my own blockchain with ZKPs, and then interact with some other ones. And he talked a lot about how scaling could go on with those different blockchains and the enterprises that are using them. But there's still a little bit of a way to go, and a lot of people have to be convinced to use different layer ones, or whether they want to use layer zeros as a piping between the different blockchains. That was a big theme at the conference. We went to another talk that had the co-founder of Polygon and a couple other people who were talking about if it's going to be a multi-chain world or not. The Polygon co-founder was convinced it would just be Ethereum, and then the other two thought that there would be like hundreds of thousands of chains. So there's a big debate going on about what that ecosystem is going to look like in the crypto space.
There's a question there, right? Are you talking about is everything going to have an Ethereum descendant EVM versus a single state machine? Right, there could be like Polygon and Ethereum are different state machines that both use the EVM. So if that seems more plausible. I mean, you could see a world where the Ethereum EVM standard becomes the dominant strain, but less obvious that you would have a single state machine running everything, right? Is that what he was saying?
Yeah, they were talking about the EVM too, and they were saying that the EVM is a little bit of a headache, and they think that, it could get moved away from in the future. But of course, he backpedaled a little bit and thinks it would be a much longer process to backpedal away from the EVM because it is so ubiquitous right now in development, and so many different people use it.
That's like asking moving away from Windows.
Yeah.
It's like forget about it. It's like quite on the contrary. All layer twos are going EVM, either EVM compatible or EVM equivalent.
Well,
right?
you can transcend Windows, but it's a generational question. Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's not something that is going to happen like in a span of 3 or even 5 years. Right. In fact, EVM is becoming more ubiquitous. Right. You have ZK rollups that are becoming now EVM compatible or EVM even EVM equivalent, because the developers who are building the applications for the end consumer are just used to writing the stuff in Solidity, and they don't care if it's if the underlying state machine is not is not that great. It's like the same. It's like the same.
Well,
It's like the same
there-
thing that we've had.
There is a question though. I mean, to just take that analogy a little further, Unix was always better, and it did not go away. It wasn't like Windows made Unix not happen. I mean, anybody with a Mac is running Unix. And Unix, of course, on the server side is almost ubiquitous. So you can kind of coexist there. The question, so that would be an interesting question: is there a horses for courses play here, or is the EVM sort of the Web3 TCP/IP? That'll be an interesting question.
Well, there are developments going on where you're running different type of state machines on the same, using the same consensus engine, right? So you can have like whatever, like DAML and EVM, and you're still using different, the same consensus / replication mechanism for the outputs, which you could, as long as you ensure is that the bytecode output is the same, right? So it's a question of compilers and agreeing on the mechanism at the bytecode at the stack level, right? So that is if you want to go down. At one point, you need to agree on the bytecodes and what they mean, and then you're good to go, right? So it's like you can have multiple funnels going into that, but in the end, you need to produce the same bytecode, or at least the bytecode needs to do exactly the same thing.
Did you guys find any sessions with our buddies over at EY? Did they show off Ops Chain or Nightfall or anything like that?
That was earlier in the week, so we did miss it. I think that was only available to the
Pro passes,
the
right?
Pro Pass. Yeah.
Piranha Pass.
So we
How
did
many
miss
people were
them.
there? How many people was it? Was a lot of people, or?
I heard at least 12,000. I heard up to 20,000. The city was just flooded with everyone's consensus badges, billboards everywhere, advertising everywhere. It was the thing. Even just on like the outskirts streets of bars and restaurants, they were all consensus themed, and it was really cool.
That is really, really good to hear. I don't mind saying, earlier this year, I mean, not even 5 months ago, I was asking around to say, should Andreas and I go for the tree trunk thing? And the general consensus was, nah, it's going to be dead. I think that was not because consensus is not a good event, but because we were still waking up from COVID, and it was moving town, and the general word on the street was that people weren't going. And I think it must have just flipped in the last, because suddenly, like about a month ago, people were like, are you going? Are you going? Are you going? Everybody's like going. So interesting.
Yeah, it was so well organized, like just very high tech, everything about the conference. It was so big. It was at the Austin Convention Center, which is just like huge ballrooms and such. There was like a product showcase in the center with booths everywhere. But everything was just well organized. You could hear well. If you went to a speaker, you could see well. And also just so many companies were involved, I think, across Austin from like the tech and business space as well. There was a meetup at the Google office and stuff like that. Everyone you met was from all over the world. So it really brought a ton of people into town, which was cool. And they said next year they will keep it in Austin, but move it to April because it was over 100 degrees, maybe like 100 to 108 degrees every day. So people were shocked if they were not from the area. So they're going to move it to earlier in the year, but I would say it was a really good success.
True story. When I worked in Austin at IBM, we gave our intern from China a pneumonia because it was 220 in the shade during the summer, and we kept the lab at like 55 degrees constant. And the temperature differential, she got pneumonia from dealing with it.
I have a question. Were the topic of bridges? Was that, did you guys catch any of that?
Yes, we did. I think we listened to a whole talk, not just specifically bridges, but it was the whole. I think Mark talked about it earlier. Who was it? It was Sandeep and Moonbeam.
Moonbeam. I think
Moonbeam.
Horizon was involved too.
Yeah, and it was
I'm
all
looking for the
just
talk.
the multi-chain versus cross-chain. There's just a whole discussion on cross-chain versus multi-chain, right? They talked about a lot of stuff, but what about you, Andres? How do you feel about the bridges? What do you think is going to happen going into the future?
So that is a very interesting question, because the sane thing to do would not to have bridges between L1 chains, because you know, let's imagine you bridge your Bitcoin. That's actually a bad example. Let's say you bridge Solana, right, to Polygon, and then you bridge it to Ethereum, and then you bridge it to Avalanche, right? To you know, over to Ava, right? If your Solana goes down or gets compromised, right, it's like your entire bridge chain is screwed, because everything relies on the security of your origin chain, right? Because you're not like creating new stuff. When you're creating new stuff on each of those other chains, right, assuming that there is that it's backed up by something on the origin chain. If it's not backed up there anymore, then what do? Everybody's going, it's going to be a bank run, right? It's like a bank going down, right? You get a bank run, right? It's like, and it's now other banks are impacted too, because you're going to run on bank one to get to bank two, to get to bank three, to get the origin bank, right? So that's the fundamental challenge of L1 bridges. Now, bridges between L2 that are sitting on the same L1, that makes total sense, right? Because both L2s inherit the same security guarantees from the L1, right? So you can't, you know, unless that L1 gets compromised, you know, whatever happens on the L2 is safe, right? It just you might not have access to your asset for a while if you use optimistic rollups, but that's a fundamentally secure approach. Now the question is people are don't necessarily behave rationally over a longer time period, because they want to maximize their short-term interest, and therefore they're willing to take on the risk that are inherent to L1 bridges, and then you lose a couple of $100 million here and there. So it comes back to my old saying, it's a trade-off, right? And you know, it's like people can apparently live with bridge hacks and so forth. So that needs to, you know, that requires standardization, that requires like people to agree on security standards and all of that. So there's stuff going on within the EA. There's the, you know, with the cross-chain interop working group. There's, you know, the L2 working group in the EA communities projects is also looking into that to standardize the interop interfaces. But it's like that will take time, and until then, you know, it's like bridge at your own risk.
Yeah, so does that mean you fall within the group of that as we progress in the future, probably multi-chain is the way to go? And then what about, you know, we want interoperability between multi-chains. Are we still bridging then, or?
So my opinion, what's going to happen is that unless Ethereum goes totally sideways, Ethereum is going to be the settlement layer, okay, right? Because it's going to be like the internet, right? It's going to be,
which is a fancy term for a big bottle of hashes in Merkle trace.
Exactly. It's secured. It's economically secure, right? And that's the whole point. It has strong security guarantees, and as long as you anchor on that, you're good. And it doesn't have to be fast. The point is, in fact, the slower it is, the more secure. That's why Bitcoin is so great, and you're willing to pay so much money for it because it is so secure. And because why is because it's slow. So everybody's willing to pay premium to get in front of the line, which means that increases your takeout, which increases the security because you're willing to pay more equipment to increase the hash power, to increase the security.
I would have to chuckle if at the end of all of this hype for a decade or more, maybe 2 decades by the end of it, it all resolves into a fancy online way of replacing the New York Times classified section for where you place your hashes. You ever look at the New York Times classified section? You'll see hashes. You'll see like long strings of characters in there, and that's somebody actually time stamping a hash.
Yeah, it's a very, 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 very plausible scenario, and a very valuable one.
Yeah, it could happen, and I think that, like Andreas, I value your insights on this, but I think coming back to the topic that John kind of talked about with the merge and the implications to the baseline standards, like people that are curious and starting to work on the baseline standards, how do we see the merge impacting throughput, architecture, the economics of the settlements, and the things that are coinciding that we need to be considering with what little information that we know? Like, how do you see this impacting what we've done so far? And, are there any pivots that are going to be required moving forward post this?
No issues for baseline, because baseline is not predicated on Ethereum or any other particular CCSM, consensus controlled state machine. So the pattern, the standard is applicable to whatever you want to use.
Awesome. I think that's what everybody was hoping to hear. That's tuning in on the show.
Also, anybody that's worried about crashes in crypto, from a baseline perspective, that's just a reduction in a distraction, right? The distraction being, people thinking that blockchains are about cryptocurrency. Obviously, you need cryptocurrency to because you need some way of paying for the transaction processing, but speculating on coin go up is not useful for baselining, right? In fact, the less speculation, the better, because then the pricing of the transaction processing is sane and not stupid.
Right.
And that would be good for our industry. Yeah.
Yeah. In theory, the gas fees, if you did deploy the principles and the standards of baselining on an Ethereum network, the gas fees should be forecastable and manageable from an operating cost model, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was on on Twitter earlier this week, and somebody said, somebody was like, Web3, dude, because Web3 will release us from the overpricing of clouds. Clouds are owning your life, man. And I'm like, overpricing from clouds. So you want to move all of your compute to a blockchain because that will reduce your pricing.
It just introduces volatility to it. That's it.
Volatility and marginal cost versus fixed cost, right?
Right.
And the idea, cloud was a stupid branding of what I would call server farms running Kubernetes. But it's clouds or server farms. Modern server farms are useful because they spread load and reduce costs, basically reduce the amount of unused cycles that computers are running. While I'm not running hardcore, MIPS, Charles, your system might be. So, and VMs made that all work. Zippity-doo-dah, I'm pretty sure that's still a useful thing. And I still think that's probably the least expensive way you get to run really heavy loads at internet scale. And you're not going to run those loads on any kind of blockchain ever.
Right.
So.
Right. And I think that's, hopefully what we can do here as the group with office hours and the show is I think it's important to address these concerns that are probably toying with people's decisions as to whether or not or how standards like baselining would fit into their architecture and their strategies moving forward. Like there's a lot of noise out there, John. I mean, like sometimes it's hard for us to separate what's fact versus fiction.
I 100% believe that whether it's called baselining in the end, 10 years out, maybe 20, just kind of like HTTP, it just bubbles up. It becomes it's sort of this osmotic thing. You're not going to get like the C-level executives at Disney saying, we must baseline, right? That's not what you do. They're not even going to know. In fact, CIO might not even know. It's going to be a pretty low-level design pattern that just says, yeah, that's not, we need to anchor some shit sometimes between platforms. And it's going to be as simple as that. It's going to dominate with no fanfare. There won't be a headline. It's not like Time's going to make baseline the person of the year. It's not the way this works.
Small changes every day. I'm right there with you. But regardless, I think we still need to help people cut through that noise and the concerns that they have. Like I'm curious for the guys and gals that were over at Baseline, or that represented Baseline at the Consensus Conference. There probably was a lot of angst around the forecastability around the merge and what's that really truly going to do to having a more fixed fee structure. Did you guys capture any real sentiment from anybody that had valid credentials to really provide some assurances to that for what the purpose is going to be for the Ethereum network moving forward under a proof of stake and a proof of work model? Because you can't just go all in on one and not the other. Like how do we keep the speculative market on the currency and still have the infrastructure operating model without it being too closely tied to a certain percentile of the operating model? I've heard conversations from folks even at Consensus talking about this, where they're saying, hey, it could be about a 10 to 20% of whatever ETH is trading at. Well, if ETH is trading at $20,000 a token, that's still rather expensive.
I always liked Ethereum even from the beginning because it did a job. Right. It wasn't, a one-trick pony that was only for speculating on whether this thing went up or down. Right. Which is just the ultimate expression of what's happened in centralized finance. Right. I mean, show me a company whose stock is actually well tied to their fundamental analysis. It's all just guessing games now. So that's fine. That's where idiocracy has arrived several centuries earlier than the movie predicted, and here we are. But I think that I still liked Ethereum better than the alternatives because it did a job, and you could pay for it. You could pay for that job. Clearly, the price is reflecting a lot more than just the utility of that job right now. But I assume that's not financial advice. I don't know shit about this stuff. Don't ever take my, if you want to know how to lose money, find out what I'm investing in. That's a pretty good way of losing money.
Yeah, the confederacy of dunces has come to life, has jumped off the pages.
Yeah, none of us is as dumb as all of us.
Yeah, but there's too much of this. Yeah, I'd like to. Ooh, squirrel.
Yeah, but so I think the beauty of it, right, is that there's so much, so many intelligent people investing or not investing their time and effort to innovate and create new things and trying out new things that will eventually we will find what the right way is forward, and the right way forward might be the wrong way long term, but it's the right way short term. Right. So it's like,
speaking of innovations, Andreas, what is your what can you tell folks about your experience recently in doing off-chain zero knowledge, recursive zero knowledge? I mean, like you've been doing some pretty industrial strength zero knowledge implementation work, and without going into any of the details about the actual project, what can you tell us about what you've learned? What surprised you in trying to actually implement recursive zero knowledge proofs off chain on AWS?
So what surprised me was the size of the data that is required to carry along. If you want to reduce, like, if you want to reduce the time it takes to generate a proof, right? Because recursive proof means that you carry basically all the other proofs with you, and all the circuits that you have, all the polynomial representations that came before it, right? You carry along with it, and you're adding new stuff to it every single time. And then you're talking with the type of prover system that is currently predominant, is you're generating a lot of data. So we're talking about gigabytes. And the more recursive steps you're adding like almost, on the order of a few hundred megabytes every single time. Depending on the prover system, can be a little bit more, can be a little less. But it's not insignificant. So if you want to do this at industrial scale, right, you have a problem of not necessarily being able to do it in parallel, because we're really good at that, but is to provisioning the data that you keep around for
storing,
for people storing it. Well, the storage cost is like relatively not the biggest cost driver.
Well, it does, as 4 or 5 or multiple gigs at industrial scale will still add up to a big number, regardless of whether it's on the blockchain.
Yeah, I mean, but it's like if you're until you're hitting petabytes, it's not really, you're not really getting into significantly meaningful numbers. But you're getting into significantly meaningful numbers much earlier if you're trying to provision a lot of data in a very short period of time, because then you are really asking networks to push a lot of data through very, very fast. So then you're basically becoming the equivalent of Netflix for zero knowledge proof generation.
That sounds like a business opportunity to me. But would you say that, I mean, like, this scaling blockchain is a law of physics kind of problem? Would you say that scaling zero knowledge is more of a Moore's law type of problem, where there's no physics that say we can't get this into acceptable speeds and costs?
Right. Time. So if you look at, so we need to remember that this field of zero knowledge proofs that carry significant business logic, right, that allow to implement business logic is relatively new. It's just a few years old, right? I mean, I remember very well when Andrew Miller and his PhD students created Hawk. That was in 2015. Using ZK Snark. They wrote LipSnark, right? So it's like so it has only been around for like really
sure, but I mean, people have been defending blockchain scaling, because it's new, and I'm like, yeah, it's new, but it also will start to scale when it ceases to be a blockchain. So in any meaningful way, this is different, right?
Yeah. So what you're seeing, right, as the science is evolving, the science is evolving rapidly. So you went from, nothing much went there innovative for about 4 years, and then in 2019 you saw an explosion that has continued in innovation around zero knowledge proof systems. You suddenly had Marlin, you had Plonk, you had Halo 2. And now you have Plonky, where you're optimizing and optimizing the prover system for size and speed, right? And the key thing is that this is done on a math. So the interesting thing is that this is done on a math basis that is then translated into code. It's not as if you're witnessing Moore's law in action in mathematics, which is kind of like interesting. Why? Because you now have suddenly a lot of people really focused on this problem, because they see that the solution to this problem that works at industrial scale solves a lot of enterprise problems. Right, so it's like it's a big difference if you only if you can do recursive proofs in on the order of a few hundred milliseconds versus tens of seconds, and the amount of data required goes down from gigabytes to a few megabytes.
I have to say, my brain would have to spend so much less time cleansing itself every night from just the ravages of bullshit if the world's websites had, were trending towards, hi, company X, a ZK company, rather than a blockchain powered company. I mean, I'm like, oh, it's blockchain powered. No, it's Mongo powered. I mean, I know a bunch of projects where it's powered by Mongo and they're dropping hashes on a blockchain, a private one at that. Right. And I'm like, well, it's not really blockchain powered. You're just marketing dummies. When is zero knowledge going to be the marketing buzzword? That would be more sane to me, I think, than where we are right now.
So I think that is going to take time, because it's an emotionally, it's not easy to establish an emotional connection to it, because what you see is
because you're not holding tokens in it.
Yeah. Yes,
you're not doing coin go up. Yeah. We've all become very greedy.
To quote a famous saying in the news right now, there is no there, right? It's hard to see it actually working, right? Like, so it's like, believe me, trust me, it's working. So it's going to take time, Andres. Yeah. I completely agree, for people to actually fundamentally, rethink how things can actually work and fundamentally trust that things are working in a permissionless and trustless way when warranted, but yet be permissioned and trusted when it needs to be.
Well, look at this way. Like, people don't understand public key cryptography, but they're using it every single day.
Yeah.
Right. They don't even know that they're using it. Right. It's like, but they're using it. Right. If you're digital certificates, that's it. That's public key cryptography.
Yeah.
So that's it. So if we get to the point where it is employed by trusted organizations that are handing it to that are exposing the benefits of it to the end consumer doesn't care. The end consumer doesn't understand the internet, right? But it's provided by trusted organizations. Your ISP, your Google, it's like AT&T, right? Those are trust anchors, and therefore people are using the internet. If you didn't know who your ISP was and you just paid them, you were like, that's kind of like weird. So we need the same thing. It goes for the internet, it goes with blockchains, and goes with zero knowledge proof, goes with all innovations that are fundamentally shifting perspectives and approaches. They need to be anchored and utilized by institutions that people trust. Otherwise, otherwise they will all question what is going on. So you need to create the trust and the trust anchors, and then the broader public will adopt, because it's going to be wrapped into services that these trust anchors provide to their consumers, that the consumers go, oh wow, this is awesome, this is great, right? It's like if you have someone providing basically a mouse over that says whether this image is authentic or has been copyright infringed or something like that, right? Wonderful. And people go like, wow, this is awesome. But if that someone is not Google or Facebook or another trusted household name, they're going to go like, really?
Yeah. And another philosophical thing that you've got to actually deal with is, just the general, human factor, to where it's like, how can you prove something to me without letting me see it, without showing it to me? And it's like, well, right now I can't show it to you because of security, or because I don't know you well enough, or because my data privacy won't let me do it. But I can give you something that is the next thing. Will that be enough? And there's going to be a lot of that. Will that be enough? You can always punt it to the regulators and say, hey, I want to, but I can't. It's their fault. Go and write your congressman.
Well, I mean, Mark, it's going to take time. And I think that's why it's profoundly important, the work that the Baseline community is doing to change the perceptions and to help people figure out and understand that there are alternate methods to what is readily available today. And Andres, as you so well pointed out, the concepts of cryptography have been around for a very long time and have been commercially viable for a very long time. And people have been using it for quite some time. This is taking that to the next level. So guess what? Back off the ledge. It's not as scary as you think it might otherwise be.
Yeah.
But yet,
Sounds-
without being
Sounds like
overly
a-
prescriptive, saying you have
Sounds
to
like
use our
a
network.
good way to take us out. Sonal, do you agree?
Yeah.
I do. Thank you all for joining this live studio audience and our discussions about consensus. It was cool to flesh out some of those topics we learned about, and we will also be doing some outreach to the companies that we connected with and pitched the protocol to. And with that, we will see you all next week on our Baseline show. Thank you so much.
Everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Baseline protocol.
Cheers.
100% adversary.